pleased to be introducing my good friend, Alan. We've been friends for how many years now?
Maybe 4 or 5.
4 or 5. We met through Jay Abraham, who, Jess, when's Jay speaking? Tomorrow?
Tomorrow at...
So Jay's going to speak tomorrow. Jay, if you don't know him, he's my podcast co-host. And Alan and I were, what does he call us, like board members of this thing, or some advisors, or something. Anyway. So we met through that, and we hit it off because we're both like the only two people with math backgrounds. And if you've ever read the book The Goal, who's read the book The Goal? So that was written by Alan's mentor, and now runs the Goldratt
Research Lab,
Research Lab, and is the leading person in the world on theory of constraints and the science of decision making. And I've learned a lot through the years getting to know Alan, and incredible speaker. You're in for a treat, and I've borrowed a lot of your thinking principles within my own, and even the process optimization that I'm going to be sharing on Friday incorporates some of your methodology. So I'll leave you.
Thank you. Thank you, first of all, for the invitation. It's an incredible honor to be here. I'm going to cover a specific topic, which is how do you set and achieve impossible goals and make impossible decisions. And I'll share with you a little bit about what I mean by impossible goals. It's something that you think you cannot achieve. It's as simple as that. As soon as you think that a goal is realistic, it means you think you know how to achieve it. So what's the usefulness of setting an impossible goal is that suddenly you realize you'd have to think out of the box. So realistic goals are not good. You have to set impossible goals because it will force you to come out of your box, right? Setting realistic goals, there will be many, many, many ways to achieve it. Setting impossible goals, probably only one way. So it really helps to focus. The second part is making impossible decisions. And my definition of impossible decision is simply that I cannot make the decision without losing out on some big upside or without gaining some major downside. So that's what makes it impossible, right? If I could only gain the upside without any downside, it would be an easy decision. So I'm going to tell you a story that hopefully will illustrate all of these points. But before I start, I want to share with you just a motto that I have that I don't share with anybody else. But since this is a level 3 type of thing, my motto when it comes to presenting is that if I'm not scared, I get scared. And I'm terrified at the moment, right? And I need that as a catalyst to be in my full attention, to give you my full attention. That's the way I prepare, is I get scared. But it's not in a way that it paralyzes me. It's in a way that it forces me to give you my full attention over the next 20-odd minutes. Everybody aligned with that? Yeah. So I'm going to start with just drawing an image, and I'll end up with this image. What's the connection between an impossible goal and an impossible decision? So I'm going to illustrate it with the following. This bar represents your current level of performance in terms of wealth, health, happiness, relationships. Add any of the dimensions that you want to improve on. That is representing where you are today. What does a realistic goal look like? It means that I have set a target based on something that looks like I'm doing X% better, like 10% better. That would be a realistic goal, right? What does an impossible goal look like? Is you simply replace the percentage with X, right? So rather than we doing 10% better, how can I do 10X better? Or rather than doing 100% better, how can I do 100X better? Make sense? You have to decide what is that X value. And the way to know that you are getting to the right level is you say, if you had to increase the magnitude of what you're trying to achieve by 2x, by 5x, by 10x, by 100x, at what point do you say, now it's impossible? That's the place that you want to be, for yourself and for your team. Does it make sense? So this represents that, what your full potential is. And this is what's impossible. This is what's possible. So the connection between setting and achieving impossible goals and decisions is that, as Nick mentioned, I'm a decision scientist, and we study what are the avoidable bad decisions that people make and repeat. And there are 4 types that I will share with you today through the story. I'm going to present them as if they are making up equal amount of that gap. It could be that in your life, in your business, all 4 of them are there, but one of them contributes most of that gap. You've probably heard of this, that 80-20 exists, but it not only exists, it is fractal by nature, which means 20% of 20%, which is 4%, will explain 80% of 80%, which is 64% of that gap. And then you can apply it again, which is 20% of the 4, which is roughly 1%, will explain 80% of the 64%, which is about 50%. So there's always going to be one element of the many different mistakes that you can make that will explain half of that gap. That's the one thing to focus on. Makes sense to everybody? So I'm going to draw them as if they are equal, but in reality, they're never equal. But in reality, all 4 of them exist. So the number 1 mistake, and I'm sharing these in sequence because sequence matters. The number 1 mistake, by far the most common, is doing the wrong things. And wrong things simply means they are not helping you get to the goal. Make sense? The second mistake is not doing the right things. And those right things is things that will enable you to make meaningful progress towards that goal, whatever your goal is. Make sense? There's always very few of them, maybe even one. There are always many wrong things, always. Make sense? So this is many, this is very few. The third mistake that we make is doing the right things wrong. And by far the biggest mistake in that category is we try to multitask. We try to do too many of the right things, even if it is the right things. Try to do them all at once. And the last mistake that we make is not learning from experience. And that essentially means we have 4 categories of mistakes. Type 4 category is we repeat mistakes number 1, 2, and 3. We don't learn. Everybody okay with me so far? So I'm going to tell you a story that was one of my most profound moments in my life. I grew up in South Africa without much resources. I had to become an entrepreneur because I realized if I wanted anything, I had to work for it myself. So from about 10 years old, I was mowing the lawn, delivering newspapers, selling things, anything to make enough money so I could afford to have shoes for the sports that I wanted to practice, to be able to afford a bicycle, later on to afford a motorcycle, etc. And I grew up with an amazing grandfather that encouraged me to have very high expectations of myself. And he said the highest expectation you could possibly have of yourself is to make one unique contribution in the world that would leave the place a little bit better off. Just one. And he gave me a book to read called The Marquis Who's Who. I don't know if any of you have seen it. It was in the days of encyclopedias, thick book, and it was basically a list of bios of the most successful people in every field in the world. He gave that to me at the age of 10 and asked me to read it and tell him what I'm noticing. And after reading a couple of hundred bios, I said the first thing that struck me is none of these people that was able to make at least that one contribution, right, that leaves the world in a slightly better place, had good starting conditions, right? None of them. They all face some kind of neglect, abuse, sometimes physical, sometimes emotional, sometimes, sexual. They all had some learning disabilities. They all had major obstacles. And that was a big realization to me. It's not your starting conditions that matter, but your starting assumptions or beliefs. And the most important starting assumption or belief is to believe that you can make a contribution to this world, that your life matters. Make sense so far to everybody? At least that was for me. Growing up very poor, to think, wow, my life could matter. I'm growing up on a small little farm. I was joking, we took a donkey cart to school. We had 30 kids in the school. It was all the grades together. So like I was in my own grade, right? And a poor teacher had to facilitate all of this. So fast forward, imagine now my life matters when I can come up with one unique thing. And what I realize is that we almost always have the answer inside of us. We just haven't been asked the right question. Think about that for a moment. It's great faith in our wisdom, internal wisdom, right? So my life mission was, what are the questions that I could ask myself and somebody else that would enable this potential to suddenly be possible? Right? Make sense so far? So I'll tell you the story. It's about 2006. I get invited. By that time, I was already considered to be one of the leading theory of constraints experts in the world. We have done projects with some of the biggest companies in the world, finding out what's their goal, what's the constraint that they have, what don't they have enough of. And you can only have 5 types of constraints in any business. You have a goal to make an impact or income, but you don't have enough demand for the product or service that you're providing. That's the one thing to focus on. Or you have enough demand, but you don't have enough capacity to deliver that demand. Or you don't have enough supply, some external resources that you need, or you don't have enough cash. Or the last one, which took us a long time to figure out, is that you don't have enough attention. Your attention ultimately is the constraint to your business. Doesn't matter which niche you pick, the size of the market in the world will never be the constraint. It's really your ability to avoid these 4 mistakes. So I get invited to one of the largest coal mines operations. At that stage, it was owned by BHP, the largest mining company in the world, to take their top management team through what is theory of constraints. How do you find the constraint? How do you make sure you don't waste it? How do you make sure you can elevate it, etc.? And I arrive in the morning, and there's 60 miners, and I notice from the body language that they don't want to be there. And thank goodness I connect with the person that invited me, and I said, I'm noticing that these people don't want to be here. What's going on? And he says to me that you are absolutely right. This is the last place that they want to be. Why? Because they had a target for the year. This is months. And this is the amount of tons that they had to produce in this mine. Their target was to get to 12 million tons for the year. That was their path to get there. right? So every month they should be producing 1 million tons. They were now in month 4, and they were at 3 million tons. So they should have been at 4, they were at 3. This is the gap. You can imagine what will happen if they have no way of catching up. Make sense so far? So I said, okay, that's really useful. And my 200 slide deck that I was going to show, I parked it. So I started off in the morning. I introduced myself, said to them I was invited here to give you a lecture on theory of constraints and how to find bottlenecks. I realized that you have a different problem. And I asked them, my understanding of what I just heard, is this correct? You had a target of 12 million tons. You're in month 4, you're only at 3 million tons. You're already 1 million tons behind. That means you're on average producing 750,000 tons a month and not 1 million. If you can't change this trajectory, you're going to end up with 9 million. You'll be 3 million behind, right? You need to not only be able to produce at 1 million, you need to catch up, which means at 1.125 million. Make sense to everybody? So you can take this for yourself, for your team, and say, is there a goal that you set and you are falling behind? Could be your health, could be your wealth, could be happiness, relationships, right? And what will happen if you can't catch up? And what does it look like? What does a catch-up plan look like? How much improvement do you have to make? How much time do you have left? That changes how fast your recovery will have to be, right? So I asked them, is this capturing the problem that you have? They said, yes. So I said, I want to go around and just briefly tell me what will happen to you personally and your team if you can't catch this up. So this is a really useful exercise to do. When people are like this, it's finger pointing. They're blaming each other. You want to find something that they have in common, which is there's a gap and there's a massive pain for all of us if we can't catch up, right? They will have to pay penalties for late delivery on contracts, and essentially most of them will be fired if they can't catch up. But you want to start with a positive note. So the next round was, tell me what will be the gain for you and your team if we can catch up. I said, great. So we have a common goal here. Everybody will have pain because of the gap, and there will be massive gain for everybody if we can close the gap. Very useful way to start any exercise, because if you start with root cause analysis of the gap, it's just finger pointing. Not useful at all. So I said to them, I'm going to do only 2 things today. And I had no idea what the second thing was. Literally had no idea. And you'll see why I had the 2 things. So I said to them, what I want you to do is, we had some flip charts around. I want you to take flip charts, so put yourself in little teams, take a flip chart, and at the top write down the initiative that is currently consuming your budget and your attention, your and your team's attention. Those are the 2 scarce resources, right? From an internal perspective. There were 60 people in the room. When they got to 100, I stopped them. So stuck on the walls, all these 100 initiatives. And I said, okay, now I'm going to ask you a question that's really a quick in the groin. It's going to hurt, but it's necessary to ask you the question. So I want to go right down on each of those flip charts at the bottom, how many more tons will it give you if you solve that problem, if you were successful in delivering that? What do you think? Of all the 100 things that was consuming the scarcest resources, how many of them actually will help them get more tons? It was 3 of them. 5 with a stretch. So I said, guess what's number 1? We're going to agree what we will stop doing, or at least freeze immediately. If we don't do that, whatever we agree today will just be added. You're already under pressure, you're already overwhelmed, you're already not coping. How will it be useful if I gave you more things to add? So please, for yourself and your team, never start something or ask somebody else to start something without explicitly telling them what they can stop. Make sense to everybody? Because that will release the attention and the budget and the other scarce resources that they will need to take the action. And there were some discussions and people, are you sure we can really stop that? Absolutely. And suddenly the energy changed. There was hope. Okay, now we have the capacity, the budget, the attention. We've just prevented this mistake, which is agree on what to stop, or at least freeze until later, right? So now I had to figure out what is it that they must start doing. What's the one or few things that they must start doing to get more tons? At that stage, I had no idea about mining. No intuition, no experience. I had experience and intuition about many other industries, but never been involved in mining. So there wasn't anything that I could grab onto that's a silver bullet that can say, just start doing this and you'll get the tons. So I said, all I know is that there's some process in mining. The first step is exposing enough ore. So I said, who's in charge of this process? And this guy put up his hand. I said, come forward. So I said, okay, what's your name? Mike. Mike, you and your team is responsible for this first step. So you've been running at about 750,000 tons a month. You not only need to get to 1 million, but to 1.125 million to catch up, right? Agreed? Yes. I said, how are you going to do it? So now we have a stare-off. I'm a pretty big guy. This guy was huge, right? We're staring at each other. I'm going, what the hell can I ask him that can get him to find out what that one or few things is? And in that moment, I had the biggest inspiration by pure luck, out of desperation, out of necessity. I looked at him and I said, can you tell me what it is that you can do that can get you to 1.125 million? And he looked me straight in the eye and he said, with an F word, it's impossible. Now, I know as a decision scientist, when you say something is impossible, it's one of the worst limiting assumptions you could have. Why? Because it means you're off the hook. You're not only not acting on it, you're not even thinking about acting on it. Because you said it's impossible. What would be the use of even thinking about it, right? So in that moment, I asked him this profound question. It's impossible unless. I want you to ask yourself that question. Pick any goal that you think is impossible and see what happens in your mind instantly when you focus it on finding the unless conditions. It will immediately get out of that stuck state and start thinking about all the unless conditions. It will get into problem-solving mode, and it is fantastic. And he looked at me, I looked at him, and he said, okay, I'll play your game. And he said, it's fucking impossible unless I can get these idiots, and he pointed to all the accountants, to change their bloody mind. I said, why? He said, if this was my mine, there's a part there that I would go into and I would flood the next operation with tons. They wouldn't know what to do with it. I said, so why haven't you done it? He said, because these guys tell me it's unprofitable to do that. We don't have the budget. So I said, okay, let's check. Let's do the calculations. And I asked him to not give me what the likely cost will be. I asked him to give me what is the worst case cost. I didn't know why I did that at the time. I figured it out only later. When we get stuck with a complex decision and there's a whole range, a distribution of best case, likely, worst case, cost and benefits, we focus so much on likely and it's not useful. An easy decision would be a decision where the worst case benefit is still greater than the worst case cost. It's the only piece of data that we need to make a good decision. Is the worst case benefit still better than the worst case cost? Not likely, not best case. Turns out people intuitively are pretty good at estimating worst case. So I said, give me the worst case. He said, I'm going to hire all these pieces of earth-moving equipment. I'm going to go in there with my team. I said, okay, tell me worst case cost. It could be as high as $5 million. I said, okay, let's do the numbers together. Worst case, how much more will you get? And he said, worst case, somewhere around 1.1 million. At $100 per ton, right? That's $100 million of additional throughput for the business. At 5 million, that's it. So I turned to the accountants. I said, would you approve that decision? Would you be willing to spend 5 million to get 100 million? It was approved on the spot because we focused on worst case. Does it make sense to everybody? Right? And then I said, okay, let's go again. It's impossible unless, what are the other unless conditions? And I simply repeated that exercise with each of the team leaders for each of those 5 steps. We came up with a plan that would give us 15. We had a 3 million ton buffer. You always need a buffer, right? Because in reality, things will go wrong. I wanted the worst case outcome to be 12 million, right? The best case outcome was around 18. The likely was about 15. And then I asked them to repeat that with their team. Because there are things that the team knows that they don't. And what we found out very commonly is if I think I'm going to get a no, do you think I will even propose the idea? No. It's like, if I think something is impossible, will I even think about achieving it? No. So there are incredible ideas and breakthroughs sitting at these lower levels that nobody has ever created a safe enough environment for them to even suggest it, right? So they repeated that exercise after we went. But at that part of the workshop, we had now said, what are these few things that you must start that can get you not just to the target, but above it with a buffer? So we've covered 2 of the mistakes. These are the many things we're going to immediately stop doing. So it releases the scarce resources that we need. These are a few things that we're not just going to start on, but double down, right? Give the stuff our full attention, give it our full budget to get the best possible outcome in the world. And then the third mistake was, now we have a few things that we can do, but we can still do them in the wrong way. And I'll just briefly share with you what is the way to do something in the wrong way. I have 3 things to do. A, B, C. There's only 2 ways I can do them. One is that I can do this, A, B, C, A, B, C, A, B, C, right? Multitasking. I do a little bit of A, I switch over to B, I switch over to C, I go back to A, etc. And I keep doing that until I'm completed. That's how most of us intuitively do things, because we're not clear on a priority. Everybody says the thing is most important, so we try to be fair. But what happens in this case is, if I just done this, so when would I have completed A? Here. In multitasking, even without any task switching cost, I would have completed A there. Do you see? B, I would have completed here. There, I would have completed it there. C there. With real life, every time I switch, there's a switching cost. This will take double the amount of time. Right? That is why multitasking is so bad. everything takes longer, you get much less done, and the quality sucks because you're all over the place. So the third mistake, going back here, is once you've got the few right things to do them one by one. Focus and finish. And then we put in a mechanism to say, as soon as we start, we go get feedback. How do we learn? Not from experience, because we don't learn from experience, we learn from experiments. So how do we set each of these up as an experiment? So that's what I want to leave you with, is how do you set and achieve these impossible goals, and how do you make these impossible decisions, is with this very simple process. Take the goal. If it's realistic, push it, increase the magnitude or reduce the time until everybody agrees, now it's impossible. See how big the gap is. Ask them to explain the pain of not closing the gap and the gain of closing it. So there's complete alignment that everybody will lose if we don't do it, everybody will gain if we do it. And then ask them, it's impossible unless. That's it. That's what I wanted to share with you today. So it's open up for questions. We basically caught up. We ended up at about 12.5 million tons. It was the biggest bonuses that had ever been paid out to all the employees. And as I mentioned, this has now become part of their standard operating practice in terms of how they facilitate sessions. Yes. But the important part was at that end of the Y, that day, people were energized, right? Because first of all, they get the energy from, we're actually going to stop all these things that don't matter, but waste our limited attention and budget. They were energized by looking at what are the things that can actually work. People, for the first time, listened to me, and I was able to get a decision right there because we compared the worst case cost with the worst case benefit, and it just made sense. And then it's to say, okay, we're going to do them one at a time, because as soon as you start multitasking, you get overwhelmed again. And then here's how we're going to do them, one experiment at a time, focus and finish, with fast feedback to learn from. Yeah, so thank you for that.
So you weren't involved with that team. You weren't involved in setting the targets originally, right?
No.
I was just curious what your advice would be for, because it seems like a key consideration is how to go about setting those targets, because like I would imagine if you set something that's impossible, you might demotivate a whole bunch of people.
Yeah, that's a fear, right? I'll tell you a brief story. Who of you have read Why 10x is Easier Than 2x, right? So you might have noticed my name appears in that book a few times. And the reason is Ben said that I helped inspire the book. I was being interviewed by Joe Polish on the Genius Network stage. And as we were setting up, he said, while we're setting up, he just asked everybody in the network to say, write down 3 ways that you can improve your profitability by 10%. People were working, and then we finally set up, and he turned to me and he said, Dr. Barnard, what do you think about my question? And I said, Joe, I'm sorry, but it's a really bad question. And he said, what do you mean? I said, how many ways are there that you can improve the profitability of a company by 10%? And I gave an example. I said, if you have a company with sales of 100, a net profit of 5, a 1% increase in the average selling price, all of that will drop to the bottom line. So it'll go from 5 to 6. That's a 20% increase in net profit for just a 1% change in the average selling price. So how many ways are there to improve by 10%? Many, right? More is less. Less is more. If you said, can you think of one way to get to 10x? That's a useful question, because there's probably only one of very few ways of getting there. And that's where the inspiration of the book came from. Wow. Yeah. So if you started off, if they don't have a goal, I would say, what's your target? Do you think it's realistic? And I say yes. Then they say, okay, as long as you think it's realistic, you think you know how to achieve it, we want you to think out of the box. How can we increase the magnitude or reduce the time for ourselves? Until everybody now says, now it's impossible. They say, great. This is the reason why we want to make it impossible, because the next question is, it's impossible unless. And the answer to that question is the conditions that will make the impossible possible. Great. Any more
Last
questions?
question. Okay, well, no more.
Thank you so much.
Thank